everybody. Welcome back. Ask the Stud, number 60. Wow, great questions again. First thing off the top of my head, just had a chance to just look quickly at see what kind of questions we had, and wow, it's really, really good ones. I can't believe, man, got some knowledgeable fans out there. Really know a lot about the sport, and great questions every show. And really appreciate you joining us for another one, and hope you're going to like it. We're about ready, and let's get this horse saddled up and on the road.
Our first question is from Gregory Rose, Elk Valley Community, Pioneer, Tennessee. You and Rob have always been two of my favorites of all time. My question is this: did you and Rob always wrestle for the same territory, or did you both go different ways at one point? And what advice would you give someone trying to make it in the business?
Well, good question. Actually, when me and Rob started, we started in the same territory. We worked in Georgia in 1970. I started in the summer of 1970. Rob had already been wrestling for close to a year, and we wrestled until in the fall of the year I went to Florida, and Rob stayed in the Georgia territory. We didn't work together too many times after that for about 4 years. Rob would come to Florida occasionally and work that territory. But he spent a lot of time in the Tennessee territory, out of Nashville, working out of Nashville, sometimes for Jarrett, sometimes for Nick. I used to go up there every once in a while, take a vacation and spend a week with him, sometimes 2 weeks with him. But then I came back to Florida, and I was always in Florida for 4 years. Once I went there in the fall of 1970, I guess it was. I was there for 4 years until I went to Knoxville in the fall of 1974. That was pretty much the time frame during the early part of those early years. Rob didn't come to work for me in Knoxville until about 1975. And I let him do the booking, and he stayed with me pretty much the rest of the time there. And then obviously in 1979 I ended up selling out the Knoxville territory to Jim Barnett out of Georgia, and we all went to Florida. We had bought that territory down there in 1978. Rob was a partner, Jimmy was a partner, Roy Lee Welch, Bob Armstrong. Me and Bob went down there, and Roy, and we worked that territory in 1978. And Rob and Jimmy didn't go down until 1979. And then after that, we were all in business together, and we pretty much stayed together from 1980 all the way into about 1987. And that's when we sold the Continental in 1987. So I guess that kind of covers it, and I always liked working with Rob, and we always got along great. It was great to see him when he was gone for a long time. And then as far as becoming a wrestler, man, what advice would I have? Well, it's a different day and time, and that's for sure. It's not like the old days. I think it's very difficult to make money unless you've got the right training and you get with a big company, major company, and you're going to make good money then. But other than that, it's a tough cookie anymore. And I go to some of these shows, independent shows, and wow, it's pretty sad. It's nothing like it was in the old days, and very, very difficult. So I guess that's about the best I can say of that, and I really appreciate your question, sir. Really good one, thank you.
Our next question is from Randall Albertini, Ottawa, Canada. Ronnie Garvin indicated that the Renegade Group, the Knoxville Five, ran against you approximately 9 months. After you sold the company and went to your other territory, did you ever run into anyone from this group? And if so, what happened?
Oh, Randall, well, yeah, that's about how it went. There was opposition there for 9 months in Knoxville with the five guys that broke away. And yeah, I did run into several of them actually after things went down. Three out of the five I have seen since. Went to a little get together on the Gulf Coast down there. They had an annual deal for wrestlers reunion there, and was down there. And Ronnie Garvin and Bob Orton Jr. were both at that same reunion. And both those guys came and apologized and were very, very nice and polite and, kind of smoothed things over a little bit. I actually got a super stud cast with Ronnie Garvin. So, I've talked to him and he's done some things with me since. And the other one was Ron Wright. And when I went back after I closed down the Continental and sold out, I went to Knoxville and I started USA Wrestling, and I got together with Ron Wright and made him my manager for my entire crew, my entire heel crew. He managed all of them just about. And so basically I got things straightened out with Ron too, and I never got to see Malenko, and I haven't ever run into Root since. But I didn't have any altercations, that's for sure, no problem, and it was pretty nice being able to settle things easily.
Our next question is from Craig Brinkley, Bristol, Florida. I'd like to know how the NWA organization functioned financially. Did members pay dues or percentage of the gate?
Good question, Craig. Heck, I've just recently done a little part of my studcast on the NWA. Kind of gave a little insight about the NWA. And I think it's number 345, studcast 345. I tell you what, Craig, they had a great business model. You didn't pay dues. You paid when you got the champion that wrestled for you, and that was probably a pretty good way of doing it. If you were in the NWA and you didn't have much of a name, your territory didn't, and you might not get the NWA champion but once a year, then to pay dues for that would have probably been it wouldn't have been fair. So what they did is when they sent you the champion, you split the money between the champion and the office in St. Louis, and most of the time it was in St. Louis. A lot of those years with Sam Muchnick, and so if they had $4,000 total coming, and then they got the breakdown was 10%. The 10% went half to the champion and half to the office, the NWA office. And so that worked out good, because if you got the champion a lot, then you were going to pay a lot more over the course of the year to get the champion. But when you got the champion, you obviously going to have a big house too. So I thought that concept was pretty good. It worked out good. And on occasion, when I first paid Harley his $2,000 payoff, he had a little less than that coming from his 5%. And I paid him more because, we had a great match. And, I really loved Harley. And I loved them all the world champions. I tried to take care of all of them a little better than what their 5% was going to work out to be. And I've always found out that it came back to me because they liked to work for me, and then they would sometimes go and ask. They would ask me sometimes when they left the territory after a 3 or 4 day run, when can I come back? And I'd say, well, as soon as they'll book me. And then I would kind of put the monkey on their back and say, that may be your question for them, not me. And so that's kind of the way I handled that. But great question, Craig.
Our next question is from Bill Aarons from Muncie Valley, Pennsylvania. Have you ever ran into the problem of a shorter wrestler not wanting to wrestle you due to your tremendous height advantage over them? I can imagine a wrestler not wanting to look small in the ring with you. Are there any guys you would have liked to have worked with but were just too short? Thank you for all your effort and time into making these podcasts. Hopefully they will live on for generations.
Great question. Wow. One name comes right directly to my attention, man. That as soon as you start talking about a short guy, and I grew up around him as a kid. He worked for my dad. He started out in Memphis working for my dad. I came out of Minnesota with Billy Wicks, and I'm talking about Greg Peterson. Greg Peterson was probably about 5'5". He was extremely short, and I remember we had started the territory down on the Gulf Coast, and Greg lived down there, Bonifay. He lived just outside of Dothan, Alabama, and I had known him. Like I said, I grew up with him as a kid, and I really had great respect for him. He's a heck of a wrestler, right? But he was extremely short. And so about the fourth week we were there, and I was a heel, and it worked out good. Greg was pretty much always a baby face, and so I booked Greg Peterson with me, and all the boys in the crew were all just giggling and laughing about it. And what are you going to do about that? And I remember it was back in the day. There was a hit song that came out about short people. Short people got no business. Short people got no business to live. I mean, it was a pretty bad song, and I remember doing the interview for the match with Greg, and I was a heel anyway, so I really had fun with it, and I said, he is short. I'm talking about he's a short people guy. I sang about half the song, and when we wrestled that night in Dothan, Alabama, I remember he came to the ring and he had this nasty look on his face. And when referees started checking us out to see that we weren't carrying some kind of gimmick and checking the tights, he said he started singing the song. And I started almost to crack up. I had a hard time not cracking up because I could see that it didn't really bother him. He was a great guy, but that's the guy that comes to mind real quickly to answer your question, Greg Peterson. And what a great wrestler that guy was. Spent time with him in Australia. Spent time with him, and once I started wrestling down in Florida, he came and worked out of the Tampa territory. The answer to the question is Greg Peterson.
Our next question is from Elwood Sandridge, Weewahitchka, Florida. Ron, in a recent studcast, you said your grandfather Roy was half Indian. What was the name of the tribe, and were they involved in the Trail of Tears?
Oh, great question, Elwood. Tell you, you would think it's a possibility. I mean, obviously, he was most famous for being from the South, basically in Tennessee, and that's where the old Cherokee tribe. That's where the Trail of Tears all started, man. What a story that is, man! Wow, it's a horrible story, but a true story, and but actually. Roy was born out in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma had all kinds of Indians there, man. That was where the Indians were all from. That's where they took them out in that area and put them in a reservation that was horrible, obviously, compared to I lived. This is a great. I got to add this. I lived in Tellico Village. And just outside Knoxville, and I had my boat there, and I took my boat every time I went out. Rather than go up to the Tennessee River, I would go down to stay in the lake that was right there in the Smoky Mountains. And when I got to that wide open part of the lake, it was probably 10 miles wide. It was, and the whole background is the Smoky Mountains. That was the Indian reservation of the Cherokees. And first time I ever took my boat there, I never failed to go back again. And whenever I had company or somebody that had never seen it, yeah, I would take them there because it was an awesome, awesome sight. So the Cherokees had left this beautiful, beautiful part of the country, and they took them into a horrible place, and what a horrible story. So anyway, my grandfather was half Osage Indian, and that's one of the tribes that was in Oklahoma. And so he grew up around Indians, and he's, and I've been doing a lot of my granddad lately in my studcast, a great deal of it, because I really want people to know the history of my family. And and a great question, Elwood. Thank you very much. But no, they weren't part of the Cherokees, and they didn't take that the Trail of Tears, man. They didn't take that horrible trip. But he's an old Oklahoman Indian, the Osage.
Our next question is from Greg Freeman. Would like to hear your opinion of Buck Robley from the old days. Thanks.
Wow, Buck Robley, what a character, man. Buck is definitely an old character. First time I ever saw Buck Robley, I was in the Florida Territory, probably about 1973, and Buck came in. What a trip! I mean, he was a most unusual guy. Then he came and worked for me in southeastern Gulf Coast about probably about 1983, and you had a character like that. You wanted to do something outlandish with him from the very beginning, because he wasn't an average dude. Everything he did was different, basically, than other people. And so I remember that first day we brought him in, we had a bad heel. I don't remember who it might have been at that time, but we wanted to do something different, and we booked him against a mystery partner, and we had a big, huge box brought into the studio on a crane, and they set the box down next to the ring, and then they backed the crane out, and so then they had the heel come out, and he made his interview, and then he says, this ain't gonna be no mystery any longer. He goes, I'm gonna go over right now, and I'm gonna find out who's in the box. And so he had a big heavy lid on it, and he'll push the lid off of the box. And then he looked over in there, and then out come two arms, and they grabbed him and drug him over in the box. And they just started fighting in the box until they kicked the sides out of it, and the wood was flying everywhere, and out came Buck Robley. That was Buck Robley's introduction to Southeastern. Buck stayed there for probably 8 months. Drew us a lot of money. Buck was a star pretty much wherever he went, and he didn't have a great body. You wouldn't have thought he was a wrestler if you ran into him. You'd never know he was a wrestler. But Buck Robley is a real character, undoubtedly one of the greatest in the history of the sport.
Our next question is from Daryl Dotson, Asheville, North Carolina. Ron, when you and the Bullet were a tag team, was there any team you would have liked to have wrestled that you didn't get a chance to?
That's a good question, Daryl. I think maybe you may be a little bit confused, because I never had an opportunity to wrestle a whole lot of tag matches with Bob. Bob and my brother Rob were the Georgia Tag Team Champions for about a year, and back in the early 70s. They wrestled a lot of great teams and wrestled against some of the best, and they were a very good team. Rob was just putting on a lot of weight. Him and Bob was working out. It was a great spot for Rob to be in, to have Bob as a partner. Rob was much younger than Bob at that point. So they made a very good team. But as far as me and Bob wrestling partners, oddly enough, when I think back on it, we might have worked partners a few times in Knoxville together before we went down to Pensacola and to the Gulf Coast. But I remember once we got down in the Gulf Coast, we started out with me as a heel and him as a baby face. Never had the opportunity to be tag partners. And then things kind of turned around, and it got to be just the opposite of that. So what happened is I was a heel, then I turned baby face, then Bob got injured, had a bad accident, and dropped some weights in his face in probably about 1982. Terrible deal. And then I ended up turning babyface, and I had wrestled some partners, and we had an angle with Jerry Stubbs and Arn Anderson as the Southeastern Tag Team Champions, and I kept trying to find partners that would fit me, that I could get that title, those belts off those two guys. And they were just beating everybody and going there. Everything was just going great. And, Bob, out of the clear blue, I had Andre the Giant one week, I remember, was my partner, and we still couldn't get the titles, couldn't get the belts off of them. And so then finally, one day on TV, Bob had been begging me, coming on every week and cutting these interviews, and I'm your guy, Ron, and he had turned heel on me the year before with Ric Flair. So he said, I know what I did was horrible, and I can't, all I can do is say, let me make it up to you, man. You want them belts? You and I are the team. We're the ones that get it done. And so finally he convinced me. So when we got together and about the first or second night that we worked against those two guys, wow, what matches we had with them. It was unbelievable. Because they had great heat, and wow, we were the two best baby faces, and we'd been fighting back and forth against each other for years, and so we got to 2 or 3 matches in, and I turned heel on him. Wow, it was unbelievable. I mean, they had to have I had to get a police escort to get out of the building area. When the thing was all over. Great, tremendous heat. And then it seemed like Bob and I just were at all odds and ends for about 3 or 4 years there, where I had my brother, and I got Jimmy and my brother, and we were bad heels, and Bob was a heel, had been a heel, and had turned babyface, and became the Bullet, and so I never really had a lot of opportunity to work with Bob, and and there would have been a lot of teams I would obviously pick to wrestle against, but that one to 2 matches that I can remember that he and I had against Stubbs and Arn Anderson, wow, they were tremendous matches, and what a great wrestler. It didn't make any difference who Bob was working with. It didn't make any difference who his partner was. Bob was magic in the ring.
Our next question is from Jeffrey R. Archery, Cleveland, Tennessee. In a recent story about your grandfather Roy picking up a hitchhiker to work a card, the one that got beat up for $1, was there ever a hitchhiker that made it in the business?
Oh, Jeffrey, I think was your name. Wow. I love that question, and I love that story. I told that story, right, on the Studcast recently, and it actually happened, but as far as knowing a hitchhiker that became a wrestler, I got one that's close. I got one that's, I'm going to say, it's close to being exactly what you're talking about here. And this is a good one in a way. About as close as I could think of is somebody that never had his own car. He never drove to any of the matches. He always had somebody take him. And I'm talking about George Goulas. And George Goulas's daddy, Nick Goulas, used to finally had his boy get trained, and he wasn't made for the business, that's for darn sure. And a little story right leading up to that. One time I flew with Roy from Birmingham into Nashville, and we went into the office there. I was probably about 12 years old. I was young. And then George Goulas came in with Nick, and George was a little younger than I was, and Roy said hello to him when he came in. Well, when I came in with Roy, I went over and shook Nick's hand, and nice seeing you, Mr. Goulas, and very, very nice and polite. And so when when Nick came in and he brought George in, Roy says, "How you doing, George?" And George just didn't say nothing, dropped his head, and just kept walking. And then Roy said, "Hey, George, how are you?" And then he kept walking. And Nick said, "Hey, what, George, ain't you going to speak to Roy?" And he said, "Do I have to, Daddy?" And I remember thinking, oh my goodness gracious, if I had said something like that. So that's kind of what George's attitude was in life. And he had always been coddled by his daddy. And so when George got to wrestling, his daddy wouldn't book him in single matches. He always had a tag partner. And he was usually one of the top guys in the territory. And the guy that was working with George would have to come and pick him up at George's house, his daddy's house, and he'd have to take him to the town, and then he'd have to take him back and drop him off at his daddy's house when the matches was over. And so that's kind of a hitchhiker in a way. I mean, he didn't have his own car, and I wouldn't doubt that George maybe even bitch about the payoff too, probably a little bit. He probably wasn't happy with what he got paid. I'm sure he went back and talked to Dad about it. What Dad I didn't get, but whatever it was. But George was a pretty pitiful excuse for a wrestler, and so. I can't. That's as close as I can get about Mr. Archie to being a hitchhiker as George Goulas, and he was usually with Tojo Yamamoto or Ken Lucas or some upstanding guy that's a great dude and a hard worker in the ring and doing most of the work, no doubt, because George wasn't going to be able to do much when he got in the ring. So I'm sure, and I know as a matter of fact, that. Guys didn't want to be partners with George when they got the assignment of George being your partner. Probably you're going to win the championship belts. That was a good part of it, but the rest of it wasn't good.
Our next question is from Randy Baxter, Dandridge, Tennessee. Hey, Stud, when did you first hook up with Don Carson, and what was he like, in and out of the ring? I always enjoyed the glove peanut butter angle.
I love Don Carson. To jump right to the answer to your question, I really love Don Carson. And the first time I ever locked up, literally, with any wrestler in the ring was with Don Carson. In my very first match, and my dad and I wrestled Don Carson and Dick Dunn in Blytheville, Arkansas. And what a night that was. It was a good experience that one night. But Don Carson to me was he was the epitome of what a good wrestler should be. Not only with what he was capable of doing in the ring, but what he what he brought to the table, which was so much more than a whole lot of wrestlers ever did. I thought that Don Carson was the greatest dressing room guy you ever had in the territory. He was the perfect guy. He came every night smiling and telling stories and getting everybody up and making that dressing room just so delightful. I mean, it was just wow. You at the end of the night, you didn't want it to end. You didn't want to go home. Wrestling just stayed a lot of times because Don and all the crap he was doing, all the things and stories he was telling, and well, boy, this and that, and loudmouth, and wow, just. I used to pay him more. I used to honestly slide him a few extra bucks because of what he did in dressing rooms. And in my opinion, when you own a wrestling company, if you have a good dressing room in which your guys are all upbeat and they're all smiles and everybody has got a story to tell and a laugh and a smile on their face, you're going to have a great territory. You're going to make money, and so are all those boys going to make money. And to me, Don Carson, that was maybe his greatest attribute as a wrestler, and he was a phenomenal wrestler. There isn't any doubt about it at all. And the old peanut butter, he did it great, man. And I'd never seen that before. And when I brought him in to work for me, he had the glove on and the TV. He showed up for TV the very first time, and I said, well, "What's that for?" And he goes, this is my gimmick, Ron. I'm gonna start having a gimmick here." And he goes, "I'm gonna have this glove," and he goes, "I'm gonna load it. You know, I'll get here." He showed me his little layer. "Here, I'm gonna do it. Look at this. Here you go." And he goes, "Well, this will be good, Ron. We're gonna get a lot of juice this way. We're gonna get a lot of blood, and I'm gonna get a lot of heat wearing this glove." I got hurt, boy, real bad. That's why I have to wear this to protect my forearm. And so that's where the old peanut butter started out. And then when he started calling it peanut butter, I mean, wow, we all crack up then. You know, I mean, they said, "I'm gonna get my peanut butter out." You know, well, what a great question, though. I love Don Carson, one of my favorite all-time wrestlers.
The next question is from Frankie Culpepper, Chattanooga, Tennessee. I wrestled independent or outlaw. The people I worked for tried to avoid running their shows on Friday nights due to high school football being so popular in the small towns. They told me it was hard to compete with that. Did you take into consideration when you would get different towns to set up, being that you had big names and established talent? Love your podcast and the way you deliver it.
Well, great question. You know, it was a lot different back in the day. I can't remember your name. You asked the question, but you know, it was a lot different back in my time. So far as being afraid to run on Friday nights. One of the good things about the territories that I had is Knoxville territory, when it had always been on Friday night. They ran every Friday night, and they had been when I came and took over the territory, I guess, for as far back as John Kazana, who had owned the territory I bought it from, and then his brother George was there back before him, and they had always run the town on Friday night. And it was pretty much kind of standard in the wrestling business in most territories that your Friday and your Saturday night was your big town, your big city. Atlanta, Georgia is a great example. Atlanta had great big cities. They had a lot of big cities in Georgia, but you know, they ran Atlanta on Friday nights. It was your big city, and you ran it on Friday night. Dothan, Alabama was the case down there in the Gulf Coast. Knoxville ran on a Friday night. You know, so you know, obviously guys weren't concerned about it. I'd say, wow, we had such good wrestlers and we had such good talent and we had a great television show and we had a big television audience, and I was maybe concerned about the high school teams not getting as big a crowd as they should have, maybe, because, wow, we were big. Wrestling was big in the places that I ran, and you want people came to wrestling and they give up the football to come see the wrestling. So it was kind of the thing to do the Friday night thing, and when Knoxville was a strange little territory, I don't think I would have had a problem no matter what city I went in, even if it was a smaller town, because I only were going to go there. Let's just take as an example, Middlesboro, Kentucky, a little small town in Kentucky just across the border from Tennessee, up in Kentucky. We would go and wrestle in Middlesboro on a Wednesday night, maybe every other month. And it would always be a full building, just packed. Everywhere we went, it didn't make any difference what night of the week it was always packed. And I believe that if we had gone there just every other month on a Friday night, we would have been packed. We would have not had any problems. So, it's a great question. A lot of to me, it sounds like in today's time, when you're only drawing 200 or 300 people, you can use anything as an excuse for why it isn't drawn. It's the problem with the wrestling in nowadays is the fact that it's just not the product that it was before. And you're not going to draw whether you run on a Friday night or a Monday night or a Wednesday. The day of the week is not the problem. The problem is more the product. And the product is not what it was before. And you're going to have a hard time drawing whatever night of the week you run on. It's kind of an excuse. I would think, a promoter that wants to say, well, we don't run this town because it's football and football hurts us on Friday nights. Well, back in the day, man, it didn't make any difference what night of the week we ran. Those buildings were packed, and a lot of times, most of the time, turning them away. They couldn't get in, all of them that wanted to. And Friday night was no different than any other. And certainly we drew great in Knoxville. John Kazana had drawn some really big crowds in Knoxville in the old Chilhowie Park out there, and we sold out the Coliseum on Friday nights just like any other night. It didn't make any difference to us. One thing that we did do that they had never done before in Knoxville is when it came wintertime, we moved our Friday nights to Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock. And the only reason we did that is because if we had snow, now snow is there's the thing that's going to kill your crowd. If you get snow in the south on your night of wrestling and the roads are a little bit icy, you're not going to sell out then. You're not going to have a big monster crowd then. So I decided the first year I was there, I saw what was happening. The first snows we had, the crowds just went down to nothing, and I said, well, if we ran on a Sunday afternoon, people wouldn't have to be driving at night in the snow, and they might get out and come on to the matches on a Sunday simply because the roads will thaw a little bit during the day, and they get kind of icy again at night. So I moved to wrestling all the wintertime months from January into 1st of April or so. We ran on Sunday afternoons at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But it wasn't because we were afraid of football. It was because we were afraid of ice and snow. And that's something we couldn't beat.
Our next question is from Russell Bell, Dyer, Tennessee. Did Roy Welch come to the matches to see you and Robert wrestle, or have excitement because his grandchildren went into the wrestling business?
Yeah, great question, Russell. My grandfather, he was a busy guy. I mean, he ran a huge territory, monstrous territory. He had a huge dairy, monstrous dairy. I mean, he had very little time for most anything. What he did, I remember one of my first times where I talked a little bit about Don Carson a little earlier here, and Don Carson, not only was Don Carson at that first match that I had in the ring with me, but my grandfather came, and so was my grandmother, and my great-grandmother were there. It was a little bit of a family deal, but I think that was the only time, well, I know that's the only time that Roy came to a match to see me wrestle. I didn't spend a lot of time in Tennessee, and it wasn't just me and Rob. He had a third grandchild too, Jimmy. So Rob and Jimmy spent a lot of time in Tennessee, and so Roy got to see them wrestle a whole lot, quite a bit, way more than me, I'm sure, because he was there doing business. He was checking up the house and going to get the money and handling the dressing room, and he had work to do, and it was part of the deal. Roy was a very strange character. I don't know whether he actually went and even watched some of their matches to see how they did. But Rob and Jimmy were really good from the very beginning. They had it in their blood, and they were really good. And I'm sure he would have been proud. I do remember that one of the things that Roy did come and do with me, one of the things that really surprised me is when I was a junior in high school. I was playing on the basketball team in Griffin, Georgia. And we had a great team. We went to the played a state tournament, and a great basketball team. And Roy and my grandmother, they had never come to see us. I could never remember a time that they had ever come to see us. And this was in 1965, I think would have been the year. And he was probably 65 years old or so. They showed up at our house in Griffin, Georgia, and they were going to stay 3 days. And I had a basketball game, and my dad had never seen me play. And I was playing basketball, sophomore, and this is my junior year, about halfway through the year. And my dad had never gone to see me play, and Roy says, what are you doing, boy? You going somewhere? Yeah, I'm going to play basketball. And he goes, you going to play tonight? Yeah, I'm going to play here in town. And he said, let me take you. I want to see you play basketball. So he went and watched me play ball that night. And I was 16 years old, I guess. And I've been 17. Anyway, I had a good game. And they had a radio. It was a big thing. We had the best basketball team they'd ever had in that city. They'd never had anything like that. And so, and I was a pretty good player. I was one of the best players on the team. And that night I had 16 points and 16 rebounds, I think it was. And so they had a radio station that covered the games, and they would take the best player in the game or who had a great game up and put him on the radio. And I remember they took me up and put me on the radio. And that meant a lot of people had left the building, but Roy came up and he got real close to the commentators where he could hear how I could talk and how I handled it, and they were going to ask me about the game. It was one of the great moments for me. I was really, I was impressed that he he wanted to see that happen, and it was just me and him. As it was with a whole lot of things, and I've spent a lot of time in my studcast lately talking about the hidden history of wrestling, and I talked a lot about my granddad and me and him making trips to Memphis, Tennessee when I was about 12 years old and real young, and the stories my grandpa told me are just priceless. I can never tell them enough. And so Roy kind of he made a real point of letting me know that there was something important for him. And I think the basketball game, to be quite honest with you, and the way I played, it probably made him happier and more proud than anything I ever did in the ring.
Our next question is from Sav McKelvey, Scotland. Hi, Ron. Hope I'm not too late with my question. With the recent passing of Ole Anderson, what were your interactions with him and your opinion of him as a promoter and wrestler? I'm still listening every week here in Scotland.
Wow. Sav in Scotland, my goodness. Well, we got them from all over. A couple of them out of Canada, and now in Scotland. Sav, thank you very much for your question, and it's a great question. Ole Anderson, he's kind of an odd figure in the sport of wrestling. I mean, you either liked Ole or you didn't. It's pretty much that way, and to be honest with you, Ole didn't care one way or the other, whether you liked him or not. Ole and I go back a long way. I started wrestling in Florida down in the early 70s, and Ole was there. And his brother Gene, they wrestled as tag team partners in probably 72, 73, 74. I mean, Ole and Gene were there quite a bit, and what a great team those guys were. They were just absolutely phenomenal. Talk about a wrecking crew. They were truly a wrecking crew, man. I mean, when you worked with those guys at the end of the match, you were like, son of a gun. Wow. You were happy to get out of there without getting hurt big time. And then Ole was far beyond a wrestler. He was a very intelligent guy. He was a good booker. He had a mind for the business, a really good mind for the business. He had the opportunity in the 80s to get involved in Atlanta in particular with Jim Barnett's territory. He became Ole was Jim's right-hand man. And Ole had all the power that you could want. And and Ole liked that. He liked that power, and he liked that control. It suited him, and a lot of guys couldn't take it. A lot of wrestlers had a very bad attitude when it came to Ole. But I had spent a lot of years with him when I was really young, and not only was him and his brother great wrestlers, but they always took such good care of me in the ring. They made me look good. I always appreciated how they dealt with me in the ring. So that made me feel different about Ole when he became more than just a wrestler, and he became involved in the organization. Went through some horrible experiences there, Ole did. About the time that Vince McMahon comes in and gets his hands on Georgia Wrestling, and a lot of things happened there that were really bad, and I can't. The Briscoe brothers selling their percentage under the table to Vince McMahon, and Ole being Ole. When I heard that story, I said, Ole's going to kill somebody. Ole's going to murder somebody over this. Who's going to take care of Ole? Who's going to keep Ole from going to prison? I was kind of concerned for him. he's a he's a real different character in the business. When they bought the territory from me, Ole was not part of it at that point. This was when they bought Knoxville in 1979 from me. They paid me part of what they owed me, and then it was 1982. It was 3 years later. I was doing good. I didn't have to have the money, but they were late on payments. Let's just put it that way. They were late on paying me the last payments on Knoxville. And Ole was the guy that called me. And he says, Ron, and he was honest. He wasn't part of it when I made the deal. He said, Ron, I just found out about the deal. And he goes, I found out that we owe you some money. We still owe you a lot of money from the deal for your Knoxville territory. And I said, yeah, you did. Yeah, that's true, Ole. And he goes, this is all on me, Ron. He goes, they don't know I'm telling you this. He goes, but I'm going to see you get your money. He says, I'm going to see to it that you get your money, because you shouldn't have to do this. You shouldn't have to wait on it. He says, you should have spoke up, And so he was a stand-up dude. He was a stand-up guy. He was one of the greatest wrestlers ever. And I mean, a bad son of a gun. He was not the type of guy you wanted to mess with. You didn't want to mess with Ole. And what a great question, Sav. And especially from somebody out of Scotland to be that knowledgeable about one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. And not just a great wrestler, turned out to be a heck of a businessman too, and a good guy. A good guy, an upstanding, solid guy, type of guy that makes the sport a better place.
Our next question is from Phil Lynott, New Brunswick, Canada. I'm hoping that you might elaborate on a meeting with Verne Gagne. Were you interested in the idea of your talent getting TV exposure on Pro Wrestling USA? Or did you ever consider bringing in the AWA champion as a special attraction?
It's a great question, Phil. Canada. Well, we're all over the globe, man. Pretty amazing. The meeting that I had with Verne, also Jerry Jarrett, who was a Memphis promoter, had a great territory there. The three of us met in Minneapolis, and I think it must have been after the pro wrestling, the television program area that you mentioned, that we met. And I don't know what happened in the pro wrestling thing, the TV show, because that was not mentioned to me during this meeting. I didn't even know anything about that, to be quite honest with you. So the business everything was falling apart at this point. This was probably 1987, 88, maybe even in 88. And, Verne wanted to try to hook up and try to share some talent and try to compete. And I had my own USA Wrestling in Knoxville at this point, the last company that I ran. I had been in the business. I had burned out 5 years before that, and was ready to get out of wrestling, basically. But, I went with Jared and them just because I wanted to be respectful. Jared invited me, and Verne was nice enough to ask me. It meant, that there was respect there for me. And so I went there, and I basically, said, no, this is going to be it for me. This is my last company, and I was just about finished with wrestling for good at this point. But you ask about his champion, Verne's champion, the AWA champion, and there is, to me, as good as, and I say this with all the utmost respect to the NWA, Vern's champion, Nick Bockwinkel, to me was just as good as any NWA champion that we ever had. And he, not only that, Bockwinkel had a real special place in my heart because when I first started wrestling in 1970, just out of college, and didn't know anything at all about the ring. She knew a little shooting. I'd been taught to shoot a little bit growing up, but I knew nothing about the ring. And Nick Bockwinkel was the Georgia heavyweight champion. He was nothing but class. I mean, gosh, he was unbelievable. A great looking guy, had a heck of a body, a tremendous wrestler in the ring, a great talker. He was the deal. He was the deal. I mean, if he had been in an NWA territory, he would have been an NWA champion because he would have deserved it. And so I knew that, when Vern got him, and I saw him performing for Vern, that he didn't change much. So what Nick did is he took a liking to me. And, I don't want to think this was because my father was part owner of the company at the time. I think it was because Nick Bockwinkel saw something in me as a young guy that, had the potential to go pretty far. I hadn't sat down and talked about angles and anything like that, but, I was always thinking about finishes and things like that. And so Nick would, for the 4 months, I was there for 4 months before I went to Florida. And every night that I wrestled, almost every single night that I wrestled, after every match, Nick would come and get me and take me into a dressing room with just me and him. And he would tell me what I did right and what I did wrong in that match. And for me, it was a tremendous training. Nobody did that. Very, very few wrestlers ever did that for young guys. And he took me there, and and it was like every night, and he was so intricate, the smallest detail. I remember one time he said, "Ron, when somebody gets a headlock on you and you get ready to shoot him into the ropes," he goes, "do you ever notice that you turn your left foot inward rather than outward?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Well, think about it." He says, "Turn your left foot there." And he says, "The guy's got a lefty and he's got a headlock on you and his body is there. When you're going to shoot him into the ropes, where is your foot?" And I thought about it, and I was like, son of a gun. I mean, wow. If you've got that kind of detail within you as a wrestler and a worker, you're in an old new world. You're in a whole ball game by yourself. I mean, it was so good. It was so good. And so, as you say, what would I have used as champion? Why, absolutely, I would have used as champion. I would have loved to have been able to, and I could have. All I had to do was say to Vern when I was in Minneapolis, is, "Vern, could I use Bockwinkel for a title defense?" And I know he would have said yes. I know without a doubt he would have said yes. And I know without a doubt I would have booked him against me. God, that would have been to me one of the greatest opportunities, because at that point, I'm 18 years in the business past when he was teaching me. And I believe we could have had probably an unbelievable match.
Our next question is from Glenn Centers, Pikeville, Kentucky. In a tag match, how would you determine which wrestler would be the one that got pinned? Who would cover him, and was it a big deal with the wrestlers?
Wow, Lynn, that's a good question. With wrestling, it was whatever you got told in the dressing room, you didn't question, and that's one of the first things you learned as a wrestler is that you do what you're told, and you never quibble. The worst mistake you can make as a wrestler to go, now wait a minute, why are you going to beat me? And which one of them you going to let beat me? You don't want to go there. Well, the deal is, I guess a good short way to put it is, if that's what you're going to ask, yet your last match in that territory. Bookers they don't deal with that. They don't have to explain to you why he wants to beat you and why he wants that guy to beat you. I mean, you have a job to do as a professional wrestler, is to go out there, have the best match that you can have, and to do exactly what you're told to do as best you possibly can. And if you're not smart enough to do that, you're not going to be in the sport very long. You're just going to have to find another way to make a living, because it was the way it was. And it didn't make any difference in what territory you in. I told a story the other day about the National Wrestling Alliance had 48 territories. 48 territories over the course of the National Wrestling Alliance career. And I'll guarantee you, if you worked all 48 territories, if you went into a single one of them and said that, you'd find out right away that you're not going to have any work to do anywhere. You're not going to get yourself a job. So you didn't question bookers, because it was their job. And it was their job to do the best they could to make money for everybody. If you had somebody who was a booker and he was willing to let you say, well, I really don't like doing that. I want to do this. You're short timer. You're not going to be in the territory very long with that type of attitude. So, you had to never ask anything. You had to be aware, and most of the guys got that kind of training before they ever started going into the ring. They knew that was part of the business, and you did what you were told. And if you didn't like what was happening, then you just went and you saw that same booker and you said, look, I'd like to give you a notice. I'm really not happy with what's going on here. That's a lot smarter way of getting axed than it would be to tell somebody that start questioning their finish and what they've come up with doing, because it didn't make sense if you were a booker to do something stupid, because if you did something stupid, you're not going to get paid very long. You're not going to keep the job, and neither are your workers or your talent. And so if you wanted to keep the greatest wrestlers, if you wanted to have the respect that you had to have, then you took care of your business that way. You didn't take anything, no talk, no dispute, no questions like that. Why'd he beat me, and why are you going to beat me? None of that. It was very cut and dry. cut and dry business, and you knew what the story was before you got involved, and if you didn't, you weren't in it very long. Well, thank you all very much for everybody for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I've got some kind of sad news today. I've been working with the same guy. He's been a great guy for years here. He has recorded every one of these Ask the Studs, and so many other things on the YouTube channel. All the short rides with the stud, and he's not going to be able to do it for me anymore. He's not going to be able to do the recordings anymore, and I have enjoyed tremendously working with him. He's a great guy, a really, really great guy, and so this could possibly be the last of these Ask the Studs. I don't know whether I want to do more or whether I can find somebody that will be able to help me record these. This guy is extremely talented. He not only can record them, he can put them up on whatever place you want them, or in whatever way you can. He knew how to take care of business, and I'm going to miss doing business with him. I'm going to miss seeing his face, and he has been a very, very special person to me over these last couple of years, and I hope to be. I'm just going to play it by ear here, see if I can find somebody else to maybe help me do these recordings. If I can, maybe we do some more of them. But I want to say that great thanks to him for sure, and I really appreciate all of these. I have loved doing these Ask the Stud shows, so they have been really, really good. I have really enjoyed them. And we're probably going to be doing the same thing. You weren't going to be seeing the short rides with the studs for a while, but you are still going to get the Studcast on YouTube regularly, and we see how it goes from there. And thank y'all all so much for all the years.